Good morning, everyone. We're continuing with our discussion of the Ananda way of life based on the guidelines for living of the Sevaka order. Let's start with the prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to feel your living presence, your loving guidance, your divine friendship, that we know with every part of our body, mind, and spirit that our true happiness lies in attunement with Thee. Guide us and bless us. Om. Peace. Amen. We're up to Article 6 of the, what are 16 or 18? 16 articles. And this article is on marriage, and we've been on it for a few days. We may finish today, we may have to go a little farther. This is the first time I have ever done a line-by-line study of these guidelines. I've known them for decades, since they were first written. I've always respected them and appreciated the subtlety and the inspiration behind what Swami wrote. But I'm also profoundly appreciating that to become a member of the Ananda Sevaka order and to have vowed to live by these guidelines is not a small commitment. Swami understates things, so you have to really take the time to attune to the implications of his words, because he doesn't make it blatant. It's not "thou shalt," and if you don't, thou shalt be smitten by the Lord, and so on. It's very the opposite. It's an invitation. But if one embraces a way of life, a discipleship, an ambition to know God, then a lot of things flow with it. And understatement is the only true way to present it, because it has to be a free choice on the part of the devotee. If it's imposed, it's not the same. It has to spring. You have to be good because good, meaning in harmony with these principles, because you want to, not because anybody's making you do it, not even God making you do it, but because I want to. Somehow this section about marriage makes it the most vividly clear, because individuals are so protective and so defensive of this part of their life. The idea that it would become also part of the community life really explains that we're doing something different here. See, one of the things that makes the Sevaka order unusual, especially at this time when it was done, was that it was a monastic order for married couples. So you could raise a family and be part of the Sevaka order. Since this time, like decades later, Swami also created the Nayaswami order, the new Swami order, in which married couples could also both become sannyasis without having to renounce the marriage. But the context of that is slightly different. You have to be past child raising time in your life. There's no children incorporated in that. And it's not a community life. It's a personal, individual vow. So anyway, here we are. And I was talking about couples wishing to be married within a residence of Ananda community should seek the counsel of a minister or their spiritual director. Members of the Ananda Sevaka order seek to develop true spiritual compatibility in their relationships as opposed to merely romantic attraction. That's a very mature way to think about relationships, isn't it? That we're here to help each other spiritually, and I worked with that yesterday. The immediate function of the minister or spiritual director, however, will be to give the community's consent to the marriage. This approval should be sought by every couple before committing themselves to getting married. Such approval, moreover, should not be given lightly, but weighed carefully. So Swami is also giving instruction here not only to the couples who ask, but to the clergy who have to respond, because you're speaking for all of Ananda, meaning it's not just a question of my own opinion, but is this in the flow of Ananda life? The couple's relationship together should be studied conscientiously, with regard primarily to their highest welfare, but also with regard to the welfare of the community. The true meaning of marriage should be explored with the prospective couple at a series of sessions. I myself find myself rebelling on both sides of this. Rebelling on the side of if I were a young person seeking to be married, which of course I'm not. And also if I am the clergy called upon to comment on it, I would rather not. But that's interesting. It was actually reading this paragraph and just seeing how much Swamiji is suggesting that we put our spiritual life in the context of our community life. Now, you see, here's what's very interesting about this. In any monastic order of a traditional type, this kind of cooperative effort would be just the given. No monk or nun would hesitate for a split second about putting major life decisions in the hands of your spiritual director. You wouldn't dream of making a life decision without your monastic superior being engaged in it. I mean, just really contemplate that for a moment. But because we're talking in terms of couples, it feels terribly intrusive, and how dare you? And how am I ever going to really allow someone else to make a personal decision like this for me, to study my relationship conscientiously and decide whether it's in the best interest of the community as well as myself and my partner as an individual. But if we were monastic in the traditional sense, it would be assumed. I mean, I'm just giving you my own spontaneous response to this and feeling my resistance to it. But if I think of myself as some nun in some order, this would be exactly what we would do. So I think that's worth noting and asking ourselves, why is the marriage relationship so different? Why should it be outside of the spiritual direction that we have accepted when we become a part of this order? Well, very simple reason, because I don't want it to be. I don't like it. It's not the way, let me think, it's my continuing to go on unthinkingly with attitudes I've always had because of prior momentum. I think Swami's calling for more of a revolution than we've been willing to embrace. No, this is my personal opinion. There's many Sevakas around the world who might have a different point of view. Very interesting. Swami says, couples ought to wait at least 1 year from the time they first announce their desire to marry before actually getting married. Sometimes time makes things more clear, whereas impulsive actions don't. Swami's had exceptions to this. I know there was a couple in the community, and they were older. They were not in their 20s. They, at least in their 40s at that point, and they both had a good deal of life experience. They were both part of Ananda, but they didn't know each other at all. And they met, and within about 2 weeks, they said to Swami that they felt they should get married. They wanted to. And he approved. He said, good decisions don't necessarily take time, they take energy. For most people, it takes time to put out enough energy. But in their particular case, he felt that the energy was already present. I don't remember specifically how soon they got married. They themselves were a little surprised by their certainty. And it has proved to be a very, very positive union for them. But to be more sensible, Swamiji suggests a year. Couples who are Ananda members should accept to be married by an Ananda minister and according to the Ananda wedding ceremony. The essence of the meaning of this ceremony, as distinct from many other wedding ceremonies, might be expressed thus. Traditionally, the bride comes to the wedding dressed in white, as if to declare, until today my body has been kept pure for marriage. This is a tradition, even though brides still wear white. The concept implied here is honored more in the exception than the rule right now. But this is a transition between Kali and Dwapara Yuga, and lots of things are being reinvented. At Ananda, however, if the bride chooses to wear white, it is to declare, my husband and I will always live together in purity. Now, it's very important to understand keeping my body pure for marriage is generally a reference to having no sexual experience before you marry, saving sexual experience for marriage, which is by no means the social norm these days. So when we're talking about living together in purity, he's not saying in chastity, not in celibacy. Purity has a much deeper meaning. Purity is the natural state. Purity is our natural state. And that purity, again, is not about physical celibacy. That purity means my true nature is divine. And I have allowed corrupting influences to come into my consciousness. Desires for material things, desire for personal power, desire for intoxicants, just all of these ways in which we become confused. That's what the whole path of self-realization is. You know, my prayers are constantly, make your presence known to us so strongly that we can see the direction of our true happiness. Our lack of purity is our confusion about where true happiness lies. True happiness lies in cooperation and attunement with our superconscious self. And impurity is when we become distracted from that. And it's impure because it corrupts our true nature. Now, this is a very subtle and important point. Often the traditional Christian point of view is that we are sinners and that we are dark. But by the grace of Jesus Christ's sacrifice, we have been released from our natural sinful nature and we have been saved. And what follows after that is if you don't accept Jesus Christ as your Savior, then your sinful nature will endure and you'll have to go to hell forever. It's a pretty grim teaching. And fortunately, it's not consistent with Sanatana Dharma. The Sanatana Dharma definition of ourselves is that we are pure manifestations of Satchidananda. And like little children going out in clean clothes, we can't resist playing in the mud puddle. So by the time we play all day in the mud puddle and then come back into our house, our clean clothes and our bright, shiny selves are covered with mud. But Mother has to just pick us up, remove those dirty clothes, put us into the bathtub, soap us all up and rinse us off again, and we are as pure as the day we were born because that is our true nature. So when we use white, which is the color of initiation. And it's brides wear it, but also in the Indian tradition, for any holy occasion, you would dress in white, because white is the color, the uninterrupted color of light, pure white light. So at all initiation ceremonies, at Kriya ceremonies, and so on, unless you've taken an initiation, a brahmacharya initiation, or a Nayaswami initiation, which makes your pure color either yellow or blue, everyone wears white. And you see in Indian temples, you see hundreds of people all dressed in white. And it's not about weddings. It's about, I am pure white light, and I am affirming that. You see, the difference is nothing can ever actually corrupt us. We can become, we can have a veneer of corruption. Corruption meaning having turned away from our true happiness in God and playing out in the mud puddles. But as soon as we remove ourselves from those mud puddles, our pure nature is still intact. And so, whereas sometimes the traditional Christian says we're fundamentally sinners until God rescues us, Sanatana Dharma says we are always pure white light. We get confused for a while, but we are never changed. You see how profoundly different that is? So, as friends on the spiritual path, which is, marriage is just a particular form of friendship. And if it's not based in friendship, it's not a union at all. It's a particular form of friendship in which two souls who both aspire to God realization make a commitment to help each other. And so wearing white by the bride or the groom, if they choose to do it, just affirms that the purpose of this union is union in God. And what we do as human friends needs all to be directed in that way. The Ananda wedding vows, one of the weddings at Ananda village, the couple were acquainted with a number of, as it happened, officials in Nevada County, Board of Supervisors and people like that. Because of their assignments within the community, they had made these friends. So when the wedding happened, a few Nevada County individuals came who weren't usually part of Ananda. And afterwards they commented about the wedding ceremony. Well, when you get married at Ananda, you're really married. Which, caused us to think about it a little more objectively than we do now. I've lived 30 years in Silicon Valley, and as clergy have conducted wedding ceremonies not only within the community, but have been invited by other couples. Usually there was some Ananda connection. On a few occasions there wasn't. They just thought it would be nice. But I remember being invited, asked to do a ceremony for this couple, and their primary interest was that the ceremony be short. Because, of course, the entire guest list was just waiting for the party, and they didn't want them to have to become too impatient waiting through the ceremony. My response was, I don't think I'm the one to marry you. I think you can find someone else. Because it was completely out of the question. The Ananda wedding ceremony, not the party, the wedding ceremony. Most couples, when they talk about their wedding, are talking about the party. They're not talking about the sacrament, the commitment that they're really making. They just get it out of the way so they can have the party. But the Ananda ceremony is more than an hour, which I guess is quite long. The couple actually sits down to enjoy the wedding because it goes on and on and on and on. There's two vows in the wedding ceremony. And the first vow, the couples face the altar. They do not face each other. And they make a solemn commitment to God. That this human friendship that has now been given to us has one purpose, which is for us through it to love you. We're not here primarily to love each other. We are here to love God in one another and to let our service to each other be an ever-deepening service to the divine. And then they face each other. But the vow to each other is also just the same. It is that we are here to find the perfection of God's love, and the purpose of our union and the purpose of whatever children we may raise, our offspring, whether children or creative deeds, is how it's stated, is also always and only to serve God. I mean, who thinks like that? I mean, everybody ought to. And God knows the sorry state of marriage in the Western world, at least, tells us that we might want to rethink this a little bit. So Swami says here, couples who are Ananda members should accept to be married by an Ananda minister and according to the Ananda wedding ceremony. As it is, every so often people will want to use, and people can use parts of it. I was in another circumstance once where someone wanted to be married, married by me according to the Ananda wedding ceremony, but they wanted to take out all references to God. No, actually, I don't think so. I think unless we have a higher ideal, a union just on the level of each other, it just isn't enough. I remember, this was unrelated, but related. In 1989, which was now a long time ago, there was a severe earthquake in the Bay Area, and a piece of the Bay Bridge collapsed. And a number of people were killed in that collapse. It was awful. I was in my very, very brief corporate training career, which lasted about a nanosecond, and this was the end of it, where I was allowed to come in and talk about certain principles, but never to mention God, because in corporate America you can't do that. Blessedly in India you can, but in corporate America you can't. And one of the people who was killed when that bridge went down was the wife of an employee of that company, and it rattled a lot of those employees. So my friend, who was the HR director, who was actually a part of Ananda, which is how I got in there in the first place, she wanted me to come and talk to the company, at least some of them, because they were so shaken by the sudden death of this man's wife. And I, of course, wanted to help, but when I thought about it, I said, I can't comfort them without reference to a greater reality, which is another way of speaking about God, but it's a greater reality than just the human mind and in the human ego. I said, people have to have a reference point. She said, can't you just tell them to believe in themselves? I said, how did that help that woman when she was on the bridge? She could believe in herself all she wanted to, and that bridge still came down on her. There has to be a greater reality in which our human lives have a context. And so in the end, of course, I couldn't go speak to them because I couldn't lie to them. Just have confidence in what? Have confidence in the fact that I have power over life and death? I mean, how feeble is that? Because we don't. We are part of a greater reality. Our lives, we are moving in a river of divine consciousness on a journey to a destination which we can anticipate, but we don't know until our consciousness elevates into that. So people can be completely sincere in what they promise they're going to do, but they don't know how they're going to be tested. They don't know what karma lies buried. I mean, the most alert and aware among us, we need help. And so when we just look to each other and hope that each other can somehow provide this security and this certainty, just a little bit of life experience tells you that's not true. But if the two are facing the altar, and both are aspiring upward to a higher reality, that's a basis that you can really work from. And if we aren't ready and able for that, we should think very carefully about what we are ready and able for. So, if any couple influenced by personal desire decide to marry in opposition to the order's decision, that's what Swami is trying to say, the spiritual director or the minister that is consulted is acting on behalf of the whole family. I mean, we're using the word order, speaking in a traditional sense, but we're acting on behalf of the whole spiritual family. We're all working together. Now, once again, remember, if we were monks and nuns in a traditional monastic order, we would not hesitate to think that this is appropriate. Now, I agree, we're moving out of Kali Yuga into Dwapara Yuga. Swamiji does not ask obedience, he asks cooperative obedience. We will cooperate, meaning it's two-sided. It's not just the superior telling you, it's you also speaking to the superior, and we work together. This is the shift from Kali into Dwapara. But nonetheless, we are cooperating with it. And life in a community cannot include too rebellious an individuality. So anyway, in opposition to the order's decision and advice, they may not be married by an Ananda minister. I mean, this is Swami's drawing a line. The Sevaka order, the Ananda way of life outside of a residential community is extremely wide, and one can pick and choose very neatly what you want, which is good. It's appropriate. We take what makes sense to us, we practice it, and it changes our consciousness, and then we move to the next step. But he does draw lines. If the wisdom of the spiritual leadership is that this is not a good alliance, but the couple insists anyway, then an Ananda minister, they have to be married in some other way. Let them instead be married outside the community and not burden their spiritual family, who have their highest welfare sincerely at heart, with the request that it go against its own conscience in the matter. You know, reading these, this is very serious. It doesn't say they can't live in the community. It doesn't say they can't marry. But don't burden your spiritual family with the responsibility. Because divorce also happens within the context of Ananda, because we are striving to live by these guidelines and we don't always succeed. We asked Swami once if one of us performs a wedding and the wedding results in divorce, if the one who performed the wedding gets any karma from that. Swami said, a little bit. It was actually interesting. He pointed out himself that he used to perform weddings. He stopped by the late 80s. But he said, you know, many of the unions that he also blessed ended in divorce. But it is something, if we know that this isn't a good idea and we're facilitating it, we don't in our hearts endorse what's happening, don't burden your spiritual family with that, Swami says. So, this is all very serious. When I was reading through this, I realized how much is being asked. Now you have to bear in mind, even within the context of Ananda, marriage is a work in progress. The success of Ananda marriage is exemplified by some extraordinary lifelong unions that are an inspiration and a joy for everyone. And it's a work in progress, because by no means has every Ananda marriage, despite all of this, resulted in success. But the success, as I say, is proven by the positive examples, which are numerous and exceptionally inspiring in their dignity, maturity, and joy. God bless you, my friend.